Anyway, uh, there. Well, okay, there we go. And I've clicked too far. Okay, let me click back a little bit. Okay, the armor of God is a symbol of the benefits and privileges of the gospel. We've said this over the last few weeks, but just want to drill this down again. When Paul speaks about armor, he's using it as an imagery. And what it is, it's an imagery or symbol of the benefits and the privileges of the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's seeing and understanding who you are in Christ. It's taking the benefits that we say that we believe and actually applying them in our lives, resulting in a new way of looking at yourself. To give a simple answer, to be this: the armor of God is everything we need to face all of the battles of life. Many will be the battles of life, but the armor of God is everything we need to face all the battles of life. Now, so far, we have looked at the belt of truth and the breastplate of righteousness. And this evening, we're going to consider the shoes and the shield. Okay? Enough time, we hope, to do that. And so, verse 15, it talks about the shoes. And I have the English Standard Version translation in the King James Version. A little difference, I just want to point this out. It says, "And as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness given by the gospel of peace." The King James Version says, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Now you'll notice a little word change there, and the particular word change I'm speaking of is readiness and preparation. Readiness and preparation. Footwear. Paul's talking about footwear. Footwear is pretty important. Does shoes really matter all that much? I've noticed this, that when I was 20 years old, or even 25, 30, there were certain shoes that I said I would never wear. I'll never wear slip-ons. I'll never wear slip-ons. I'm going to wear lace-ups. And I think it was somewhere around 50, 55 that I decided slip-ons were going to be just fine, since I couldn't bend over and tie my shoes anymore. And so, and plus comfort, when at 20, you're not worried about comfort, you're worried about cool. You're worried about how they look. When you get 60, 65, you don't care usually, because you just want comfort, So proper footwear is extremely important. For example, here's, these are what they're called Nike Vapor Edge, and a pretty expensive shoe. And you notice they have some cleats there on the bottom. And this is a football shoe, by the way, okay? This is a football shoe. And so to play football, you'll wear this shoe instead of this shoe right here, which is, I understand it's still a Nike, and it's still a relatively expensive shoe, but not compared to the one you just looked at. But the point is this: you play football in this shoe, not in this shoe. Okay, but and you'll see right away there's nothing to give you some traction there. Okay, you'll play golf in this shoe, right? Again, not you won't play golf in this shoe. All right, you'll not play golf in that shoe. You'll play golf in this shoe. Okay, because it has cleats on there, and it's great for the game of golf. Not this shoe. Okay. This shoe is not for the golf course. It's not for the football field. It's not for the baseball field. I don't know what that thing's good for. I'll be honest with you. I hate them. I can't keep them on my feet. I don't know, but some people like them, and they work good, I think, for the beach. It all comes down to this, right? Traction, protection, and mobility. For traction, you want some sort of a cleat, something that'll dig in, you see. But then for protection, I'm told that in ancient times, during war, that the enemy would often put spikes in the ground, see, so that when you were on the offensive and you were coming after them to protect themselves, they put spikes in the ground. And so you certainly don't want to wear something like that right there, do you? And so it come down to protection. So it's traction, protection, and then mobility. It had to be light enough to maneuver. So on one hand, it needs to be heavy enough to protect you from the spikes in the ground. But on the other hand, it needs to be light enough, to be able to maneuver. You see, so now we appreciate those who design shoes, right? Because, there's different shoes for different things. And like it's like workers out in the field, they need to be tough enough to be durable, but also light enough that it doesn't feel like concrete blocks. So in Paul's list of armor, what do the shoes? You look at that passage and you might say, well, it has to do with the gospel of peace. But I want you to look at the verse just a little bit closer. While it does mention the gospel of peace, the shoes actually are not representing the gospel of peace. Here's what the shoes are representing. And as shoes for your feet, having put on the readiness, or another word is preparation, given by the gospel of peace. So the shoes do not represent the gospel of peace. The shoes represent a readiness, a preparation that is given by the gospel of peace. So what does that mean? It means the believer is being instructed to put on the readiness or preparation given by the gospel of peace. So let's unpack that a little bit. That word, the Greek word for readiness or preparation, it can mean nimbleness, okay? Again, you're talking about, that ability to maneuver. It's a readiness, a nimbleness. It's the opposite of sluggishness. It's a readiness for action. It's having the assurance and confidence that you can say, I know where I stand. I know where I stand. It's ready for whatever may come. It's a toughness to be able to say, by God's grace, I can take it. By God's grace, I can stand. It's also a lightness, a joy, a joyful lightness. And so the word readiness encompasses all of these things: a nimbleness, a readiness for action, a confidence, an assurance, and a toughness, a lightness, a joy. That's all of these things encompassed in this word readiness. So Paul is saying that all of this comes, all of this readiness for action, all of this nimbleness, all of this assurance and confidence, it comes from thinking about how the gospel brings peace, how we can actually experience this peace operationally in our lives. Now, when we think about peace, what do we most often think of? When we think about peace, or when we even read about peace in the Bible, what usually comes to mind? And I'm going to suggest that it's usually what would be called subjective peace. Let me explain. Let's say that a person suddenly comes to church. And I've observed this over the last 27 years. Sometimes suddenly somebody will just show up at church. Or sometimes they'll show up for, a service that they don't usually come to. Usually they may pop in sporadically on a Sunday morning, but then all of a sudden you find them popping in on a Wednesday night. And I've learned a few things over the years about this, and I think at least I have some idea of what's happening. I can remember numerous times we give a gospel invitation, say, for those who you want to come to Christ, and people would come forward and they'd kneel at the altar, and you'd be thinking like, oh wow, this is great. There's going to be joy in heaven over these new believers coming to Jesus. And then you talk to them after the service and you say, tell me a little bit about what's going on. Well, I'm going through a divorce right now and I'm just a mess. And you find out it had nothing to do with coming to Jesus. It was a lack of peace. Subjectively, they were tore up inside. Or, I've had some people say, I'm getting ready to go on my first airplane flight and I'm scared to death. And all along you thought they were coming to Jesus, And I'm just, or people may be doing this. They come to you and they say, do you have a Bible verse about so-and-so? And you think, wow, they're really getting interested in the Bible. And then you find out that it really didn't have anything to do with that. It's just they're going through some trouble right now. They're upset. Often they're experiencing some sort of trouble in their life, some unrest. and they think that these things will be a means where God will grant them peace. It's kind of like, Lord, I don't usually come to church on Wednesday. Is an objective peace, all right? Peace that is outside of ourselves. And I want you to see a statement here that I think it nails it down. Before we can expect and enjoy peace from God, we must be at peace with God. Okay? That's one of those sentences you want to remember, okay? Because you're going to run into people that you may not realize it at first, but they are looking for peace from God. They're wanting God to step in and do. We can expect peace from God in a subjective way. We must be at peace with God, and that is what Paul is talking about. That's the kind of objective peace that the gospel brings. You see, the Bible teaches that we as people are, number one, we are hostile to God. We are at war with God. We are alienated from God. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because actually this is going to be pretty much the topic for this Sunday's sermon, so I'm not going to blow it all because you won't come back or you won't tune in. So we're going to hold a little bit of it. But here's what I want to point out. You see, we need to be made at peace with God. Why? Because according to the Bible, we are hostile to God. We're at war with God. We're alienated from God. And this is really hard to impress upon people. It really is. I think, before I ever became a Christian, I don't think you could have convinced me that I was at war with God or that I was hostile to Him. I was indifferent to Him, but if you'd have said, well, according to the Bible, you're hostile, I'd have probably said, no way. But just let God cross your will. just let Him cross your will, and you'll see what happens. You'll see that hostility. It'll come out. It's there, okay? And so if indeed it is true that we are alienated from God, that we are at enmity with God or hostile to God, then it makes sense that we must what? We must be reconciled to God. And that is what we find in the Scriptures. Here's the verse that says, "For the mind that set on flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot." So we're hostile to God, so we need to be made at peace with God. We need to be reconciled to God. So in Romans 5:1, we find statements like this. "Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ." So having peace with God, one, is possible, and it comes through Jesus Christ. Also, we find that all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to Himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So what we find in these passages is that the gospel has given us peace with God. And that's the peace that Paul is talking about. So, what is Paul getting at here when he says, put on this preparation, this readiness, which, it's kind of like a shoe, put it on, which comes from the gospel of peace? Well, we can't be certain here, okay, but it certainly seems like that Paul is thinking of something in the Old Testament, right here. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of Him who brings good news, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Now, do you notice in that passage, feet, good news, gospel, and peace? All of the things that Paul is mentioning in Ephesians chapter 6. Could it be that that this is what he's getting at, okay? And I think it's reasonable to say, yes. I mean, he uses here the imagery of a herald. A herald, you think of, like the newspaper Lexington Herald. Heralds were people who, before newspapers, ran with the good news. And typically it was the kind of news that, hey, our king and his army are off to battle, and people are wondering, like, what's going on? Are they winning? They're losing? And so the herald carries information from the battlefield and runs feet, and so they run back with news and imagine the herald coming in and going, our king has won, our armies have been successful, we're victorious. Can you imagine? Everybody starts dancing in the streets. It's good news that brings happiness and joy. So what is Paul getting at here? Certainly part of the believer's readiness would include a readiness to spread the good news that brings peace. When Paul tells us to put on the readiness, to shod our feet with the readiness and preparation which comes from the gospel of peace, it may be, again, similar to another verse that we find here in 1 Peter that you're familiar with. But in your hearts regard Christ as Lord, the Lord as holy. What does it say next? Always being what? Prepared, ready to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. What Paul's getting at is, having experienced the gospel of peace ourselves, now that we're at peace with God, we are made ready to herald the good news to those who are in need of the gospel of peace. And so, on one hand, as the enemy, again, we're facing an enemy who is attacking, and fiery darts and all that kind of stuff, which we'll get to in just a minute. But we need to be ready and nimble and assured and confident that we're at peace with God. No matter what the enemy may say, no matter what the enemy may accuse, we are solidly and confidently at peace with God. And at the same time, we are to, as we put that on for ourselves, we're also in a good place to where we can say, I can do this. I can go, I can be a herald, and I can bring the good news to others. Now, let's take a moment to look at another piece of armor, and that is the shield of faith. And I debated as to whether there'd be enough time to do both of these, and so we're going to do our best. In verse 16, in all circumstances, take up the shield of faith. And again, Paul is using the imagery of a shield. And I've read that in ancient warfare, soldiers who would be on the offensive, they would approach a walled city. And as they would get close, the inhabitants of that city upon the top of the wall would pour down like hot liquid, like a molten liquid that they would pour down upon the advancing soldiers. And as I read about that, I thought, wow, a shield would be quite handy in that kind of circumstance. People are pouring stuff on you here that's going to scar you for the rest of your life or kill you, and so you need a full body shield. Okay, so for the Christian, it is not hot liquid that we're afraid of, but it's what? The flaming darts. Look at the rest of verse 16. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. Sinclair Ferguson is a Christian writer, and he identifies 4 major fiery darts. Now, this isn't all the darts in Satan's quiver, I'm sure, but Ferguson identifies 4 major fiery darts used to unsettle the believer and rob them of their assurance and peace in the gospel. And so let's look at them. Fiery dart number 1. God is against you, Satan says. He is not really for you. How can you believe he is for you when you see the things that are happening in your life? Now, surely we've all been down that road, and we've all had that experience, that fiery dart. You know, you go to church on Sunday and you're saying, you know, God is for us. God is for us. And he's not against us, he's for us. And then you step into the brand new week, and it doesn't feel like he is for you. It feels like he's against you. And there is the fiery dart of attack. Fiery dart number 2. I have accusations I will bring against you because of your sins, Satan argues. What can you say in defense? Nothing. And what do we say in defense? You know, we've talked about this numerous times. What do we say in defense? You know, I heard some years ago, and I thought this was a great answer. Like, a person would say, look, Satan, there is so much more you have forgotten that's against me, you know, that you're even scratching the surface, you know. I'm in need of grace every day, you know. That's a good answer. You know, it's just a good awareness, because we don't want to do this. We don't want to start going, well, you know, hold on here, you know, I do this for the church, and I give this, and you don't want to start appealing to your own actions. You want to come back to the actions of Christ and what he has done. Fiery dart number 3. You can say you are forgiven, but there is a payback day coming, a condemnation day, Satan insinuates. How will you defend yourself then? Like right now, you know, you're going to church each Sunday and you're comforting your conscience, but what about that judgment day? What about on judgment day? How are you going to defend yourself then, you know? No more church going after that, you know. No more making up for anything. What are you going to do? Fiery dart number 3. Fiery dart number 4. Given your track record, what hope is there that you will preserve to the end, Satan asks. And I guess all of us at some time have felt some sort of fiery dart like that. I think these are some good examples that Sinclair gives. And so, you know, what do we do? What do we do with these? Because that's the context that Paul is speaking of. A shield with which you can extinguish all, it says, the flaming darts, or the fiery darts of the evil one. You know, we should note here at this point, you might would ask, or just observe that God allows Satan to do this. You know, it doesn't. You know, Paul makes it pretty clear that these fiery darts are going to come, and obviously God allows them to come. You know, he could put up his hand and go, no, you know, no more darts. You know, no more fiery darts. So you know, just you remember in the book of Job, you know, Satan came to God and said, you know, I want to do this to Job, and God said, you can do this, but you can't do this. You can do this, but you can't do this. But then why would God allow this at all? You know, isn't that a question that we find ourselves at some point asking, you know, why would God allow fiery darts? Well, first, you know, let's make a distinction here. First, Satan wants to cook your goose with the fiery darts. There's what he wants to do, but then God's intentions are entirely different. Okay, so there's the intentions of the evil one in shooting the fiery darts, but then there's an intention of God for allowing them, and they're not the same. I remember some years ago there was a brother who asked me, you know, he was going through a particular hard time, and he said, I do not understand why this here. I don't understand these passages. It says this, in this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. What he was particularly saying about this verse is that phrase where the tested genuineness of your faith. In other words, why does God do that? Why does our faith have to be tested? I mean, isn't he just happy that we believe in him? Isn't he just happy? I mean, can't he just be happy that we're finally giving him a nod and thumbs up? Can't he just be happy with that? Why is he testing our faith? Well, testing here is an attempt to learn the nature or character of something, and Peter uses the analogy of gold. Now, I think this verse is helpful to help answer the question, why is God's got his intentions, Satan has his intentions. Satan wants to cook your goose, drain your faith, but God has different intentions. So testing here is an attempt to learn the nature or the character of something. So God tests the genuineness of our faith, much like a goldsmith tests the genuineness of gold. Now, how is that done? Well, gold is a precious metal, and when it goes into the fiery darts, and when it goes into the fire, it comes out better than it went in. So how does it do that? How does it come out better than it went in? As the fire burns off the impurities in the gold, the impurities will rise to the top, and the goldsmith scoops it off. It's the dross. He scoops it off, and these impurities, they're there in the gold. They've been there all along, you see. And the goldsmith is trying to get out of the gold what is not gold. Okay? The impurities are not gold. And the goal is to get pure gold. And so the gold will be pure, and that way it will be greater than it was before it went into the fire. Okay? So the gold is going to be better having gone into the fire. It's going to be better than when it went in. And the same goes, the same principle that Peter's making is this. Our faith, which is, by the way, what are we told here? More precious than gold that perishes, though it's tested by fire. So in God's eyes, our faith is more precious than this precious metal called gold. Our faith is being tried in order that we will be greater than we were before we went into the fiery trial. Now, see, that gives us God's intention in allowing the fiery trials to come, the fiery darts. The devil has his intentions, God has his intentions. And while, I don't like pat answers, because usually pat answers don't help people, but that's something to meditate upon. It's something to kind of swirl around for a while, think on about God's intentions in all of this. You could also use the imagery of pruning. The Bible does use the imagery of pruning, and I'm not a good pruner myself because I either want to prune too little, or I don't want to really get down and prune. Because you've seen people who really know how to prune. You walk out the next morning and go, like, what have you done? What have you done? But then you watch the thing grow and you go like, wow, how did you get that? Well, I pruned it. I pruned it, you see. And so God is the perfect pruner. But it just doesn't look that way when the pruning takes place, right? See, we're told that God disciplines those whom he loves. And I heard this definition before. Discipline is a controlled form of suffering with the purpose of avoiding greater suffering later. Discipline is a controlled form of suffering. Any parents here? Discipline is a controlled form of suffering, and it hurts. I know it's tough, to say no. You're not getting it. but some form of discipline that's going to cause them to cry. It's a form of suffering, but it has the purpose of avoiding greater suffering later. And see, so God disciplines those whom he loves. If God knows that the greatest suffering you can know is to be cut off from him for all eternity, then what kind of smaller suffering might he use to cause us to run to him? God knows these things, right? He knows. He knows what it would be. He knows what the greatest suffering would be for us to be cut off. I mean, Jesus said on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And so he knows, and so then what kind of smaller suffering might he use to cause us to run to him now? So Peter mentions the genuineness of our faith, and Paul speaks of the shield of faith. So let's consider, what is faith? Okay, let's take our remaining time and ask that question. What is faith? True biblical faith. And I think there's been good answers to this over the last, say, 25 years. I remember when I came here 27 years ago, there were a lot of books being written about the Word of Faith movement that were, correcting the multiple errors of that. And so today, it seems like those books have obviously done a pretty good job. But on the other hand, we still see some error regarding what faith is. And so let's talk about it for a minute. True biblical faith derives its power not from any power inherent in itself, but rather from the object of that faith. See, for years I heard people talk about, that our faith had inherent power in itself, and so you needed to have you have a lot of faith to get things done, or so you really needed to jack it up to get God to do things, and that sort of thing. A lot of faith. Now you could put a lot of faith in an unprepared parachute, and what's going to happen? I mean, you can have a whole lot of faith in it. I mean, you can have giant faith in an unprepared, unpacked parachute and jump to your death. See, someone might say, and I hear things like this, if your faith is meaningful and it helps you, then it's good. No, it's not that your faith has some inherent power in it. It's not because you think your faith is meaningful and therefore it's good. No. See, a small amount of faith in a prepared parachute will help you, right? I mean, and all you have to do is have a small amount. You don't have to have a large amount, just a small amount. See, it comes down to this. It's the object of your faith. It's not how much faith you have. It's the object of your faith. It's not the amount. It's not the intensity of your faith. It's not some perceived subjective meaningfulness. It's the object of your faith. That's biblical faith. For example, faith in the resurrection of Christ. Easter's coming up soon, and our minds will be probably more on that than any other time of the year. But faith in the resurrection of Christ is only meaningful if it's actually true. See, if it really happened, then faith in that would be meaningful. If it did not happen, it doesn't matter how much faith we have in it if it didn't happen. The biblical concept of faith is that faith is merely the instrument that connects us to the utter trustworthiness and all-powerful God who created the heavens and the earth and who made us for a relationship with him. So Paul is not saying here when he says that we have the shield of faith, he is not saying that faith has some remarkable defensive power against Satan in and of itself. Some would say that. Some would say that, well, that shield of faith, you got to have a whole bunch of faith that somehow that it's got power in and of itself. That's not what Paul is saying. Rather, he is saying that faith, biblical faith, protects us from Satan's attacks because of what faith enables us to take hold of, namely the power and the protection of God himself. So you could say this here. Faith, biblical faith, is bringing to bear the reality of who God is on your situation. It is remembering God. Bringing to bear the reality of who God is on your situation. This becomes clear when we look at the usage of shield imagery in the Old Testament. Notice these verses. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. I am your shield. Proverbs 30:5, every word of God proves true. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. But we might ask, at this point, well, the Old Testament tells us that God is our shield. Then why does Paul say faith is our shield? Is there a problem there? Is contradiction there? No. Faith is the means by which we flee to God for refuge. Faith is the means by which we flee to God to be our shield, you see. It is how we cling to God and find in him comfort and protection in times of difficulty and distress. And that is why we build our faith on the truth about God. There's one more little interesting passage that I want us to think about. In 2 Kings, one of my favorite Old Testament stories, maybe yours too. The king of Syria had set out to seize the prophet Elisha. And so the king inquired as to where Elisha was, and the answer he was given, he's in the city of Dothan. And so the king and his armies and chariots came and they surrounded the city of Dothan by night. And Elisha's servant, you remember the next morning, Elisha's servant got up and he looked outside and he saw the Assyrians that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So on one hand, we have the Syrian army there to do harm, and what Elisha and his servant are able to see by the opening of their eyes is the awareness that you've got the mountains were full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. You've got the Lord's hosts, his armies surrounding. So what is all this saying? I found this quote years ago, and I found it helpful. The opening of his eyes. And it's talking about the servant, okay? Because Elijah prays, "Oh Lord, please open his eyes that he may see." The opening of his eyes did not create a new reality. He was enabled to behold what was already a reality. Our faith is not creating anything. We're embracing what God has already done. See, that quote helped me back in the middle 80s and late 80s when the church that we were attending at that time had a little book rack outside in the lobby. And it had little booklets by Kenneth Copeland, Kenneth Hagin, and Jerry Savelle, and all the Word of Faith. And I love to read, and so, anything free, I would pick it up, like a knucklehead. And, not everything free is good to read, and not everything that you pay for is good to read. But anyway, I was reading these booklets, and I was just tore apart. I was like, because, I was being taught that my faith could create things. I could speak it out. Just speak things out. I had the same creative power that God had, And it was quotes like this by people who knew better that helped me to see that our faith is not creating anything. We're embracing what God has already done. We're embracing his reality. What he's done, we're not creating anything. And by the way, isn't it interesting too that all this happened in the city of Dothan? Dothan. Well, I was preparing this. It never dawned on me. But do you remember what happened in Dothan years before this happened? What was it? Anybody tell me? Somebody was thrown into a pit. Joseph. In the city of Dothan. That's where he went to find his brothers. Remember, some guy said, "Hey, they're in Dothan." So he went there, and what happened? He got thrown into a pit. Life bottomed out right there. But, and the commentator that I was reading the other day about this said this: God was just as real. What God was showing to Elisha and his servant, that God was just as real. He was a shield for them, just as he was to Joseph. Because even though Joseph had been thrown into a pit, God knew right where he was at. All this was in the hands of God. God was his shield, see. God was real to Joseph, and he was showing Elisha in that same city. Perhaps, it doesn't say, we don't know, but perhaps Elisha remembered, perhaps he remembered, this is where Joseph was at. This is the city where he was at. He was thrown into a pit. And God was showing Elisha that he was just as real to him as he was to Joseph. And he will be for us as well. We've got about 5 minutes. 5 minutes. That's a lot of time to burn. This is. I'm told this is the part where people shut off their live stream because they can't hear you. And so, look, you've had 55 minutes. So thank you for being with us. Any observations? Any thoughts that you have about shield, faith, either one of these tonight? Aside from let's put them on. Let's put them on. I tell you what, for me, this has helped me a whole lot more. I'll be honest with you, for many years, I just put on the armor of God, put on the armor of God. Well, okay. But it's certainly been beneficial to dig into it for myself, to see just how bad I need it. And what it is. It's not some esoteric teaching, like some mystery, like, put on the armor of God. No, it's just applying the gospel. Applying the reality of the gospel of Jesus Christ in our life. Rubbing it in. Not just believing it, but applying it, you see. Which is something we badly need to do. Larry? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Anybody else? Well, we got what? We got a little bit more to go when we look at the helmet next week, and then the sword of the Spirit, and probably we've got 2 more Wednesdays, and so that'll probably take care of us for the rest of it. So if there's nothing else, let's put on the whole armor of God. All right, if you'll stand, we'll pray and we'll go. Okay. Heavenly Father, thank you for your love for your people. Paul calls this the armor of God. It's not something we have to go scrape up, not something we have to order on Amazon, trying to find some new way to fight the battle. No, it's the armor that you've provided, and it's provided through the good news of what you've done for us in Jesus Christ. That never grows old. May it never grow old in our hearts. May we not think of the gospel as the chicken pox. It's like, I've had it, now I can move on. It's not that at all. It's most precious. It's good news. It's news that brings joy when we understand it. So, Lord, may we apply it to our hearts today and tomorrow, the rest of our lives, until Jesus comes. In his name we pray. Amen. Good night, everybody.